All right, I'm going to go ahead and get us started. My name is Miara Levinson, and I am one of the co-conveners for the Civic and Moral Education Initiative here at the Ed School. And because we have, as we always like to have a different crowd somewhat, I'm going to spend 1 minute telling us about the CMEI. This is an initiative that's a joint faculty, students, and staff initiative here at the Ed School. We started about 5 years ago now, and we have both this colloquium series that meets about once a month, although actually we're meeting considerably more than that this month. So just as a preview, next week we have Sean, next Monday, we have Sean Arce, the now fired head of Mexican American Studies in Tucson, Arizona, the Ethnic Studies program that has been under attack in Arizona quite visibly and importantly. He's going to come talk next Monday at 2:15, so I'd encourage you guys to come to that. But we sort of sponsor colloquia from academics, from practitioners, from policymakers, from people in the field of civic and moral education, broadly speaking. And we invite you all to join with us in those investigations. In addition to the colloquium series, we also have an occasional film series. We showed 2 films in September, and we have a film coming up in January. And we welcome also suggestions for films. We have also an early career scholars program, which is for doctoral students here. You can apply in your first year of your doctoral program to enter starting your second year, and it provides both financial support for research, for travel, for conferences, and also in some cases a fellowship to do work in what the Spencer Foundation calls the New Civics. And we have also an active student group, the Civic and Moral Education Student Initiative. So we would encourage you, both if you're interested in civic and moral education in any way, and also because it helps us to be able to demonstrate our ongoing interest to people in the community here at the Ed School and broader. Please sign our form, and if you want to learn more about what we're doing and you're not yet on our mailing list, if you will put your email address, we will add you to our mailing list, and you also might want to visit our NIN and become a member of our NIN. Which is cmei-harvard.ning.com. And we post lots of conference announcements and speaker announcements and course announcements and research opportunities and all sorts of things. So that's CMEI. We are really thrilled to be hosting Scott Seiler here for today's colloquium. Scott is a 2008 EDD graduate of the Ed School. He worked under Howard Gardner as his advisor and wrote a really phenomenal thesis that turned into a set of articles that looked at social justice education in privileged settings in a public suburban school serving mostly middle and upper income kids in the suburb around here. And that's really been one of the most, or sort of some of the most powerful pieces of writing when I've taught my class on civic education. Students have engaged with, really helped shape thinking about what does it mean to do social justice education, how do kids' identities play into things, teachers' identities, etc. He's then expanded this body of work to literally dozens of articles and 2 books. We're going to hear about the second book today, Character Compass, How Powerful School Culture Can Point Students Towards Success. He had an earlier book that got a lot of attention, again, both from academics and practitioners, called Shelter, that looked at Harvard undergrads and their work in a homeless shelter and how that shaped the students' experiences and thoughts and so forth. He's done work also in other higher ed settings at Boston College, looking again how interactions among service and academics, moral education, civic education, community sort of play together. So he really has a terrific body of work on this. Prior to coming to the Ed School as a student, Scott was a high school teacher for 6 years, and so we're thrilled to have him talk. He will talk for 30 or 40 minutes. And then James Newman, who is a third-year doctoral student here at the Ed School, will deliver 5 or 10 minutes worth of commentary, provocations, reflection, etc. Come in, don't worry about cutting across and help yourself to pizza along the way. James is before he came to the art school. This is actually his 4th year because he did a master's as well. He worked for 8 years for Peace Games, now known as Peace First, both doing work here nationally and internationally in Colombia. And before that, worked for a Center for Homeless Children, whose name I forgot. Horizons for Homeless Children for 3 years. And so he brings a sort of wealth of experience of thinking about school culture and the ways in which interventions by educators and outside partners can sort of shift school culture and get how students experience that and think about it, especially in the civic realm. James is one of our early career scholars, and so for those of you who are interested in that program, I'd also invite you to ask him about that. So we're really thrilled, and then we'll open it up for discussion. As I always say, we schedule these to run somewhat long, so this is an hour-and-a-half program, so that we can have a truly democratic civic dialogue among all of us. And it's not just sort of being talked at. And so please do think of questions, comments, etc. At the same time, because we schedule this long, we realize that people may have classes they need to be at, meetings they need to be at, etc. So don't be embarrassed about needing to leave early. Nobody will take offense, and you please help yourself to keep things along the way. Yes. Oh yeah, I'm sorry, I totally forgot. So also we have a photographer here from Harvard University taking photos in general, and if you do not want to be photographed and you can see that she's pointing herself your direction, please just catch her eye and make it clear that you do not want to be photographed.
Thank you so much. It is such a pleasure to be back at HGSE, and there's a bunch of familiar faces in the crowd from sort of various, I guess if you spend a decade at an institution, like you meet people in lots of different ways. It's really nice to see folks. So thank you for coming. So I think that one reason that a lot of the research on character education has been inconsistent in terms of its quality is, and perhaps even sort of conversations about character education among educators has been inconsistent in terms of moving things forward, is because when people hear the word character education, different people mean different things by it. And and I think that if I did sort of a quiz, with which of these do you sort of most associate with what character is, I think there'd be some variation in terms of what people's responses were. And so I think it's useful to maybe sort of start to share with you kind of where I started when I started with this project, which is that Marvin Berkowitz, who's a character education scholar at the University of Missouri, he defines character as a set of psychological characteristics that motivate and enable individuals to function as competent moral agents. And I underline motivate and enable because I think it's useful to kind of note that this definition of character sort of suggests that it's both the motivation to act in certain ways and then the actual action in certain ways. And I think that's important. And then I think I underline competent moral. And I think that what we've sort of seen, and I'll show you in my next slide, is we've seen that sort of when people talk about character education, some people are more interested in the competent, and some people are more interested in the moral, and there's kind of a continuum of kind of what folks can be interested in. And I think it's kind of useful to think about that for just a moment. So, because character education has been sort of part of the public schooling system since its inception. When some of the founding fathers of character education, Thomas Jefferson and Horace Mann, made the pitch for public education, one of their central sort of claims was that public education is important because, in this sort of democratic country that we've begun, we need to be educating folks to fulfill their responsibilities as citizens. And so I think that when those folks were talking about character education, they were really talking about civic character. They were really thinking about what are the qualities that we need to instill in youth that will allow them to perform their responsibilities as citizens of the various communities that they're a part of. Then in the 1970s and 80s, we had Lawrence Kohlberg here, very invested in just community schools, and then in a very different way, we had William Bennett and others very interested in the book, in virtue ethics, and both of those, I think both of those movements, though very different from one another, were interested in sort of moral character. Kind of how do we help youth think about and take on the qualities that allow them to engage in ethical interactions with other individuals and in the work that they do. I think that No Child Left Behind was written in 2001. probably sort of put at least somewhat of a damper on the character education movement in the sense that suddenly we were, the government was saying to us, we're going to prioritize English literacy and mathematics, and we're going to test literacy and mathematics. And I think that, in a very kind of rational way, schools that were worried about, their students' performance on these tests spent way more time on literacy and mathematics and way less time on character education, but of course also history, social studies, science, arts, and so on and so forth. And I think that's kind of, so I think that really like the 2000s were sort of probably a poor decade for character education, practitioners and scholars. But then I think just a couple of years ago, something interesting started to happen, which is that I think some of the school leaders sort of who associate with the education reform movement, who had been sort of, the goal had been for many years to get students to college, that was going, at least in many schools, many urban schools serving low-income kids, that was going okay to getting kids to college part. Like not overwhelmingly, it's not like we could sort of say the job has been done, but we're doing okay on the getting kids to college part. And then we started looking at, well, are they persisting in college? And the answer was sort of no. A lot of kids were getting to college, accumulating an enormous amount of debt, and then dropping out, which arguably was sort of putting them into a worse position than if they hadn't gone to college in the first place. And so you start to hear this phrase coming up over the last few years, to and through college. And you start to see some of the schools sort of engaged in the ed reform movement, thinking about like, well, what are the qualities that we need to instill in our students so that once they sort of move beyond us, they have these qualities that are going to help them sort of persist in college. And when those folks talk about character, they're really thinking about performance character. They're thinking about what are the qualities that are going to allow our youth, our students, to maximize their potential. And that could be in academics, that could be in athletics, that could be in arts, like across a number of different endeavors. And I think that if you kind of read the publications that kind of folks in the ed reform movement read, you'll see over the last 2 years just this surge in kind of talk about character. So I think that this is from KIPP. I think this is a KIPP advertisement, what if character counts as much as academics. This is an Uncommon Schools advertisement. This is a whole bunch of different people. So you can see KIPP talking about grit, which is one of their core character strengths that they're interested in. You get this idea of resilience at a girls' school. This is a headline I took. Blackstone Academy kind of citing perseverance, discipline, as performance character strengths. And then probably virtually all of us have heard of this book, How Children Succeed, which Paul Tough recently published, which is really focused on this character strength of performance character strengths, grit, curiosity, zest, and so on. And so I am. Oh, and I should just say, all of those previous examples were from sort of like high-performing charter schools. But my in-laws live in rural North Carolina, and this is the middle school that that's kind of right near the housing development that my in-laws live in. And I don't totally know why it says perseverance there, but I do think there's some indication that this focus on performance character has kind of drifted beyond the charter schools. And so I am, in truth, I'll admit to you that I sort of just got lucky, I think, in terms of my own kind of research interest coinciding with this focus on performance character, because it wasn't by design. As Mira mentioned, I really study the development of social responsibility in young people. That's kind of what I've been working on at the high school level and the college level for a number of years now. And because I'm a former English teacher, I'm particularly interested in the role that different types of literature interventions can play in fostering social, or don't play in fostering social responsibility. So my previous project, that Mira kind of alluded to, is that I was studying at Boston College, a community service learning program that combined philosophical study with community service learning, and I was looking at its effects, and I saw some pretty decent-sized effects, and I was interested by that. And so I happened to hear that the Boston Preparatory Charter Public School, which goes by Boston Prep, and it's a charter school in Hyde Park, that something that they did is that they have an ethical philosophy class that every kid in grades 6 through 12 takes once a week for their entire time at Boston Prep, and that just kind of connected to what I was interested in, and so I kind of sort of put in place like I started putting in place like the wheels, I guess, to study this. And I'll just say quickly that there's actually surprisingly little research on the effect of kids studying philosophy. There is some, but most of it, ironically, is at the elementary grades. students, because there's this Institute for the, I'm going to get the acronym wrong, but something like the Institute for the Advancement of Philosophy for Children at Montclair State University, started by this guy named Matthew Lipman, that is very much focused on teaching philosophy to elementary school students. And so quite a bit of the research on teaching philosophy to kids was at the elementary level. And then virtually all of the research that's focused on kind of introducing philosophy in schools has focused on like its ability to foster academic skills as opposed to character skills or character qualities, character strengths. And so that's kind of what I wanted to contribute to. And so just to tell you a little bit, really a lot more about the Boston Preparatory Charter School, because I think that, in order for my findings to be of any interest to you, like you have to kind of know what the school's about. So this is the mission of the Boston Preparatory Charter School: an environment structured around scholarship and personal growth, cultivate students' virtues of courage, compassion, integrity, perseverance, and respect. And I'll just quickly note that Boston Prep, which was founded in 2004 by a Harvard alum, a Phillips Brooks Association alum, is unequivocally a no-excuses charter school in the same mold as KIPP and Uncommon Schools and Achievement First and so on and so forth. But it's a bit distinctive in that these character strengths, or what they call virtues, that they explicitly say they're focusing on, quite a number of those are really moral character strengths, which places it as a bit of an outlier, sort of within this ed reform, no excuses world. And I was kind of interested to look more closely at that. And I'll sort of say at the outset that Boston Prep is a high performing charter school, like sort of by the conventional measures of the MCAS. This is how Boston Prep students performed in comparison to kids in the Boston Public Schools and the state on the English Language Arts MCAS. This is how they performed, on the Math MCAS in comparison to those two groups. And of course, success on the MCAS does matter. But clearly more important to folks in education is whether kids are making it to college and then of course getting through college. And Boston Prep has now had 2 graduating classes. 100% of the 2 graduating classes have gone to college. We don't have enough, we don't know yet whether they're going to graduate, but that's where we are right now. And so I want to kind of delve into this ethical philosophy class for a little bit, and then talk about what I did to try to figure out what effect it was having. I was at the gym this morning. I was listening to an on point from a couple days ago about iPads in schools, and I couldn't, they just wouldn't give me enough specifics to feel like I knew what you could do with an iPad. I just wanted a little bit more, and so I photocopied the actual sort of worksheets or handouts, I think is a better word for it, that I'm going to be talking about. I think 25, and so I might ask a few people to share, but if I could just kind of pass a couple that way and a couple that way. Maybe if you're kind of sitting near someone, maybe share. Okay. But I just thought that this would be useful. So as I said, all of the students at Boston Prep take a weekly ethical philosophy class, focused in large part on the school's 5 core character strengths. And I think one of the neat things about their ethical philosophy program is that they very consciously sequenced the ethical philosophy program in the same way that you would sequence, math or English or so on and so forth. And one of the things that kind of happens that's interesting is that the definitions of those character strengths actually get more complex as the kids get older. So in 6th grade, when the kids are studying integrity and ethics class, which is what they call it, the kids learn that the definition of integrity is to tell the truth. And then in 7th grade, they sort of learn, it's not that integrity doesn't mean to tell the truth, but we're going to complicate it further. We're going to say that integrity means to take responsibility for one's actions. And the kids, in all grade levels, are reading excerpts from sort of philosophical thinkers, and then thinking, and then kind of reflecting upon what are the thinkers trying to say about this character strength, and then what does this character strength have to do? How does it play out sort of in our own lives? And so for this study, and I'll get into the logistics of the study in a little bit, but I did 93 observations at the 3 different schools in the study, and a lot of that was looking at ethics classes at Boston Prep, and so on. And so I kind of want to show you a little bit about what does ethics class actually look like. So here's a conversation in the 7th grade ethics class that involved a reading by Gandhi, and I think you have an excerpt from the reading ahead of you. So the teacher asked, so I should say in this memoir by Gandhi, it's an excerpt from Gandhi's memoir where he's talking about how when he was 10 or 11 years old, he stole a watch from his brother, and then felt guilty about it, and made the decision to confess to his father that he had stolen this watch. And you can sort of see it in front of you. There's this sort of unusual language that Gandhi uses in that exchange, where he says, like, there could be no cleansing without a confession. Like, and so the teacher is kind of asking the kids, like, what does that mean? And so you can see the teacher asks, what does Gandhi mean about there not being a cleansing without a clean confession? And so one of the kids in the class says, well, it cleans you by making your life easier. And another kid said, you're not going to feel guilty. And a third kid said, so his dad can trust him again. And a fourth kid said, because he knew he did something wrong. And I think that just gives you a little bit of a flavor of like what kind of conversation was happening around the virtue of integrity and what Gandhi was writing about in terms of integrity. So that's at the 7th grade. At the 8th grade, the definition of integrity gets more complex. And so in the 8th grade, the students learn that integrity means to be authentic or true to oneself. And I think if you flip the page, you can see some of the work that the 8th grade students were doing around a lesson involving Harvey Milk, who was a city councilor in Los Angeles, and importantly, I want to say the first publicly elected gay public official. And so this is a conversation the students were having about Harvey Milk, who was assassinated. And so the teacher asked, well, what effect did Harvey Milk's authenticity have on other people? Meaning his sort of decision to be out about who he was. And one student said, well, hopefully a lot of people saw an openly gay man, but half the people hated him. And then another student said, well, I think eventually people realize that they're prejudiced against gay people, and that gays can also be human and successful. And then a third student said, it's kind of like Muhammad and Islam. He had this idea for a new religion that he thought everyone should follow, and everyone boycotted. And a fourth student said, Harvey Milk did the same thing as Martin Luther King for gay rights. And so here's just another excerpt where you can just kind of see the kids kind of grappling with this idea of integrity as authenticity in the 8th grade. And I'm going to show one more example as we get into the high school grades. So in the 6th, 7th, and 8th grades, all of the kids who I interviewed, and I'll talk about my interviews in a little bit, all of the kids at the high school who I interviewed really poo-pooed their middle school experience, because they said in middle school, like ethics, like you sort of get definitions of these character strengths and you kind of talk about them. And they said, whereas in the high school, you were sort of responsible for coming up with the definitions yourself. And I do think that that's something that like kids do, like they kind of like look back like disdainfully on their prior year, and there was a lot of that. But I think that there is some truth to what they're saying, because this is sort of the opening of the 9th grade ethics syllabus, and I think it's kind of an interesting metaphor. That Boston Prep says, ethics class is now a kitchen, not a restaurant. There's no more waiter or waitress. There's only a kitchen, and you are the chef. You'll cook up your own ideas about the meaning and value of ethics and the 5 key virtues. And so they're very explicitly kind of distinguishing between what ethics looks like at the middle school level and what ethics looks like at the high school level. And as a result, they kind of leave behind, like, whereas in the middle school, it's like we're in the integrity unit right now, and then we're in the compassion unit, and then we're in the respect unit. They kind of leave that behind once they get to the high school, and the discussions kind of merge a little bit. So one of the discussions in the high school ethics classes that I thought was interesting focused on Plato's sort of ideas about the social contract and their relationship to personal integrity. And they used Muhammad Ali as one example and Pat Tillman as another example. And I'll say a little bit more about those folks in just a moment. And unlike whereas the middle school ethics classes were kind of like each class, I mean, they built on each other, but they were sort of like, you had like a conversation and then it was done, and then a week later you kind of went on to the new one. In the high school ethics classes, conversations kind of carried over for several weeks. And so on September 17th, in a 10th grade ethics class, I believe, they started by kind of they'd done some reading about Socrates and the social contract, and I'm not a philosopher, but Socrates was convicted of, I'm going to say, treason for sort of sharing philosophical ideas, was sentenced to death, had the opportunity to run away, but chose not to. Said that, like, as a member of this community, I have a responsibility to kind of live by the decisions of this community. Is that by and large? Thank you. So here's just, I mean, the high school conversations are much more complex, and so I'm only showing tiny little pieces of them because it would just go on and on. But here are just two kids kind of in the course of that conversation disagreeing. One says, well, he should run for his life so he can continue to spread his beliefs in philosophy. And another says, I think he should stay loyal to the Athenian social contract since he lives there and is a citizen. And the kids were really sort of going back and forth about, like, what's the relationship between your personal integrity and your sort of responsibilities as a member of a community. And then I think it gets really interesting a couple weeks later, where they're talking about Muhammad Ali and Pat Tillman. And for those of you who aren't super versed in those two figures, so Muhammad Ali, who was a boxer, made a decision to not fight in the Vietnam War, in large part because of his religious beliefs as a Muslim. And then in contrast, Pat Tillman, who was a player in the National Football League just a few years ago, after the September 11th attacks, quit his job, sort of quit his professional football job to enlist in the Marines and went to war. And so the students were kind of talking about like this question of personal integrity in relation to these two different decisions. And so one student said, Pat Tillman decided to let go of his career because he went to war. Muhammad Ali should have partaken in the same social contract. Another student kind of counters, Ali didn't have the full power of the social contract behind him. He didn't have every single right that white people did, and they're telling him to go fight for his rights. And the kids really go deeply into this question of what's this relationship between your personal integrity and your responsibilities as a member of a community. So those are just, hopefully that between those conversations and the kind of the handouts in front of you, you just feel like you have a sense of what this looks like at Boston Prep. And let me talk a little bit about the actual study. So my goal was to find schools that were as close to Boston Prep as humanly possible, but that didn't have this ethical philosophy program. And so I identified two schools that struck me as kind of contenders for this comparison: the Roxbury Preparatory Charter School and the Academy of the Pacific Rim Charter School. All three of the schools are within 10 miles of each other. They all admit students via random lottery, and they're all oversubscribed by quite a bit. And they all would be defined as high performing, and you can see the students' MCAS scores on the far right. And they all have character education in either their mission or their vision statements. Like, they all cite character education as a crucial lever in what they do. And then what's interesting, and again, this is sort of the fortuitous part, because in truth, I was really just looking for some schools that could sort of be good comparison schools. But in truth, like, those two schools really think about character in relation to performance character and/or civic character, whereas Boston Prep is very much focused on moral character. And again, like, that's not to say, of course, all three schools would say we care about all three things. You wouldn't get any school to say, like, we only care about moral character and performance character doesn't matter. And you can see clear examples at all three schools of ways in which they care about, all three of these types of character. But I'll show you their core values in just a second, and you can see that Boston Prep skews towards moral pretty strongly, and the other two schools skew in the other direction, or in other directions. And I'll just quickly say, because I guess, in the writing that I've done about this study, it's really important for me to convince people that these are good comparison schools, or like the whole study is not that valuable. And so I think it's important to point out that, so the founder of Boston Prep, Scott McHugh, was a teacher at the Academy of the Pacific Rim for many, many years before he started Boston Prep. And in the charter contract that, in the charter application to sort of start Boston Prep, Scott writes that the curriculum, academic standards, and disciplinary system will be modeled after the Academy of the Pacific Rim. So those two schools are structurally very, very similar. I think it's fair to say those two schools, they all have extended school days and school years. All the kids wear uniforms. They all use demerits and merits to punish bad behaviors or reward good behavior, and so on and so forth. The reason I brought Roxbury Prep in as a third school was you'll notice, if you look at the demographics, that Boston Prep and Academy of the Pacific Rim are very, very similar to each other structurally, but Academy of the Pacific Rim has many more white kids than Boston Prep, and it has a smaller number of kids on free and reduced price lunch, whereas Boston Prep and Roxbury Prep have very similar numbers in terms of students of color versus white students, which is almost zero in both cases. And they both are approximately 3/4 free and reduced price lunch. And I think, frankly, like, now that we're about 8 years into Boston Prep's kind of existence, in some ways they would probably say they align more with Roxbury Prep than Academy of the Pacific Rim in terms of just the way they do things. So that, I just want to give you a little bit more of a sense of what I was thinking as I sought out these comparison schools. And all three of the schools cite, when I look at the core values of these three schools, all three cite integrity and perseverance. Like, all of them, that's something that they have in common. And Boston Prep and Academy of the Pacific Rim both have courage and respect as well. So they line up pretty closely in terms of their stated core values. But you can see that, I think if you kind of go through them, you can kind of see that Roxbury Prep and Pacific Rim sort of skew away from the moral character strains that Boston Prep is really focused on, and more towards performance character strains and civic character strains. And I can say a little bit more about that. But and I'll just sort of say structurally, in terms of like, well, how do they deliver on these values? All three schools, again, because they're very similarly structured, they all allocate basically 2 periods a week towards non-academic stuff. And all three schools use advisory for one of those periods, and then Boston Prep uses the ethical philosophy class for the other. Roxbury Prep just has 2 advisory periods a week, and Pacific Rim, at the middle school level, has a character education class. Like that's really focused on civic stuff. Like, they do sort of town meetings like within there for that class. They kind of talk about contributions to that class community and so on. So that just kind of gives you a little bit of a sense of what the delivery system is for character education at these 3 schools. Okay, so in terms of the actual study, I collected a lot of different types of data. I surveyed all of the kids at all 3 schools at the beginning, during the first week of the school year, and then during basically the last couple weeks of the school year. And I included within that survey the character strengths that Boston Prep cites as its 5 key virtues, and that overlaps with character strengths that the other schools cite as well. I put community in italics, because both Roxbury Prep and Pacific Rim cite community as sort of a core value, and so I wanted to sort of assess that. I sort of struggle with whether that's a character strength or not. Like, whereas I think like integrity and courage are sort of individual qualities, like community, at least sort of the way I was trying to measure it, I was really trying to measure like your sense of connectedness to this community, and I think that's a little bit different. I just kind of wanted to acknowledge that. I did interviews with about 60 different students, faculty, and parents across the 3 schools. As I said, I did about 93 observations of advisory classes, ethics class, and my research team, I should say. I did not do all 93 myself. Like advisory classes, ethics classes, character ed classes, community meetings, and so on and so forth. And then all 3 schools gave me their internal school data, like all of the grade point averages, demerits, merits, attendance for all those kids. And I thought it was just, this is a shot I captured from the Roxbury Prep website a couple months ago, and I'm standing right there. And so I thought that was a good indication of how much time I spent at these 3 schools that actually am on their website, kind of working in the background. Okay, so let me say a few words about the key measures that I'm gonna say a few words about. And I guess I'm going to focus on 3 key measures because those are the measures that I found statistically significant results for. And so I want to say, so I did not find statistically significant differences between the schools on the other 3 measures. And I just kind of want to note that I won't be talking about them in papers I've written. I kind of put all the descriptive statistics on those other measures as well, but I don't have much to say about it. So the integrity measure is really measuring academic integrity. I think it's important to kind of be explicit about that. Like, and so the questions are questions like, I would cheat in a class if the teacher was a poor instructor. And I was asking students to respond to questions like that. The perseverance measure asks questions like, I always keep it my homework until I'm done with it. Trying to really get at this question of persistence on challenging tasks. And then the community measure, which those of you who are who kind of are statistically minded will see has a weak reliability, and that's kind of important to put out there. It was questions like, it was really trying to get a sense of kids' like feelings of connectedness to the school. In my school, there are people I can ask for help when I need it, and another question was sort of in that vein. And let me just very quickly say a word or two about like the research in those 3 realms. Like, so in terms of perseverance, I think in large part that the fascination with performance character strengths has kind of come about because of some recent research by Eleanor Duckworth and Angela Duckworth and a few other folks that have found these very strong correlations between perseverance, as sometimes they call it self-discipline, sometimes they call it self-control, but kind of like lumped in as perseverance. They found that perseverance is a stronger predictor than IQ of middle school students' grade point average, attendance, time spent on homework, acceptance into competitive high schools, and so on and so forth. And I think that people are really excited about those really strong correlations. And that really follows up on, we actually have 80 to 100 years of research, like sort of reporting on those correlations between kind of persistence and success. In terms of academic integrity, like why does this maybe matter? Kids report cheating a lot. I mean, I think that anytime I go to a presentation where there's research on academic integrity issues, it's sobering. So 67% of American middle school students reported cheating in the past year, 90% reported copying a classmate's homework. Those numbers go up when you get to the high school level and are still high in the college level, even if they go back down a little bit. And then in relation to school connectedness, and this is why I was interested in it, even though I wasn't sure it was a character strength, is that we have, I mean, if we hear people talking right now a lot about the perseverance and that's relationship to student success, but school connectedness is also been found to be a very strong predictor of both GPA and achievement on high stakes assessments, so by a bunch of different researchers. And so I was kind of curious to see if these different sort of approaches to character had different impacts on kids' feelings of connectedness. So these are I'm just going to focus on the middle school for this presentation. So these are the middle school descriptive statistics on those three measures that I just talked about: integrity, perseverance, and community connectedness. And in terms of integrity and perseverance, you'll see there's no statistically significant difference on the time one measure for either of those character traits, integrity or perseverance. And they're also, you'll notice, very, very high. I think that, I should say it was a 5-point Likert scale. So for instance, the average Boston Prep student, when I asked him or her in September, the first week of the school year, your likelihood of sort of approaching your work honestly, they said 4.56 out of 5. They were very convinced that they were going to approach their work with honesty and integrity. And I do think a weakness, retrospectively, of this research study is that I think that asking middle school students in the first week of the school year, how much do you think you're going to persevere on your work? Is not actually a good recipe for getting good results. I think that we all begin the school year, God bless this, with a lot of optimism, about both our commitment to integrity and our commitment to perseverance. And so there's no difference across the three schools, and I think those numbers are very, very high, and I think it'd be fair to say inflated. When I asked the students again at the end of the school year of those same questions, you can see that at all three schools, on both of those measures, the mean scores dropped because kids have real data now for how much did I persevere on my homework? Did I sort of compromise my integrity at various points in the year? But you'll see that on those time two measures, statistically significant differences do emerge between the three schools. And I'll get into that in just a second. But on the community connectedness measure, I only gave it at time two because with the middle school students, a third of the sixth graders would only have been at their school a few days, and I just they wouldn't have any sense of. I don't think they would have an ability to describe their connectedness to the school, so I just took that measure at time two. So this is what I found. When I ran a regression model looking at students' academic integrity at time two, controlling for that time one score, so I'm looking really at their shift over the course of the year in academic integrity, controlling for a bunch of demographic predictors like gender, race, grade level, grade point average, and then also controlling for, so all of those kids were sort of nested within either ethics classes, advisory classes, or character education classes, and I controlled for the fact that each of those kids was having, each of those nestings was sort of having its own kind of unique experience within the advisory, advisory 1 in Roxbury Prep might have a little bit of a different experience than advisory 2, and so I was controlling for that clustering. And when I ran that regression model, I found that Boston Prep students do show a statistically significant shift, sort of maintenance of their commitment to integrity over the course of the school year in comparison to their classmates or to their peers at Roxbury Prep and the Pacific Rim. So basically, over the course of the academic year, Boston Prep students show a stronger commitment to academic integrity. However, they show when I do that exact same kind of modeling with the perseverance measure and with the community connectedness measure, you see that they show a weaker commitment to perseverance over the course of the year and weaker feelings of community connectedness. And so you kind of get one thing and you don't get the other thing. In which, I guess in a sense you could say the school that's focused on moral character, the kids show higher levels of academic integrity. And in fact, at the high school level, I see academic integrity, and I also see higher levels of compassion at Boston Prep. But at the other schools, I see higher levels of perseverance and higher levels of community connectedness. And I think that's in large part because those schools are using that second period a week to focus on community building and to focus on matters related to perseverance. And the book, I should say, you'll notice I've only been talking about really one school in this study, and that's because I wanted to go deep into one rather than just say a few words about all three. But the book kind of looks at what are each of these three schools doing to get the results that they're getting? Like, so Boston Prep seems to be doing well on moral character streams such as integrity and compassion, but Roxbury Prep is doing really well on perseverance. Academy of the Pacific Rim is doing really well on community connectedness. Let's kind of look under the hood and see what's happening at these schools. And so I should say, like, all of the effect sizes, those were statistically significant differences across the three schools, but the effect sizes are fairly small. Like, they range from 0.17 to 0.24. So I mean, it's not like I'm saying like these kids at one school are dramatically different at the end of the year than kids at a different school. But I mean, small effect sizes are generally what we get in education, like, I mean, like in a sort of a short duration. And so I think it would be, in some ways, it would be, if I'd seen a large effect size on something like integrity, that would be sort of shocking, on some level, to see just a massive shift in the way kids conceptualize, that core value. So let me kind of just flesh that out a little bit as I start to wrap things up with just a couple kind of notes from kids about qualitative interviews, and then more about what I think is happening there. So one 8th grader that I interviewed, I just asked them questions about their experiences in ethics class, and he said, having ethics class kind of reminds people every week about what we're here to do and how we should treat other people. And then I really love this description by a 10th grader. I realize it's a little bit long, but she says, we're not saying we're complete saints or anything, but if you're going to go with the decision of cheating or not, you're thinking, oh my God, what is this going to affect? You kind of think of everything instead of just doing it and thinking, I don't care. Everyone gets that feeling, and I think it comes from ethics class. And I think that actually really sums up nicely what I want to say about how I think ethics class is working. And it has to do with kind of issues of identity. So Erikson, Erikson, in writing about identity development during adolescence, basically says that what adolescents are doing is they are sort of seeking out new and different ways of understanding the world. Like, they've been living with their nuclear families and sort of close social networks for many, many years, and they kind of have that set view of the world and sort of and view of the world. And now that they've reached adolescence, they're kind of reaching out for new and different ways of understanding the world. And they sort of that process of reaching out for new and different ways of understanding the world is central to the development of a mature adult identity. Right? Like, you sort of take what you already have from your nuclear family and your close contacts, and then you kind of consider other options that teachers are offering you, that friend groups are offering you, that organizations that you're affiliated with are offering you, and you kind of put those all together, and you come up with what Erikson kind of describes as a mature adult identity. And I think that you see in the ethics class, you see the kids being exposed to new and different ways of understanding the world. Like, a number of the teachers that I interviewed talked about ways in which like their kids would push back on things that were coming up in ethics class, and saying like, well, that's different than what I'm learning at home. And a bunch of them used the example of, so quite some of the compassion stuff that the kids were learning in middle school was focused on sort of not responding, not retaliating in the face of being taunted or being teased. And the kids were really pushing back on that and saying, like, my father says, like, if I get teased, like, I need to hit back. Like, and the point isn't that, like, the school is right, the parents are wrong, or that the parents are right, the school is wrong, but rather that, like, the kids are actually getting exposed to new and different ways of understanding the world, and they're getting the opportunity to kind of reconcile that for themselves. And I think that's really powerful, and you see that getting increasingly complicated as the kids get older. The second thing that I think is kind of interesting to think about has to do with schemas. Sort of just in thinking about, like, well, how does that play out sort of cognitively? Like, so schemas are sort of cognitive structures for how we as individuals act in a given situation, right? Like, like you sort of have let me give an example that's going to come up. Like, so, because we know that individuals possess a desire to act in ways consistent with their sense of self. Like, if you think of yourself as someone who does not cheat on a test, like, that is central to your sense of self, you are highly motivated to not cheat on a test when that test is put in front of you, right? Like, because to do so would be to mess with, like, how you conceptualize yourself. And the research on, like, well, how do you impact schemas is through learning and practice, right? Like, I mean, we need to help people kind of come to see themselves in a particular way, or people need to come to see themselves in a particular kind of way. And then that greatly increases the likelihood of them acting in that particular way. And so I was actually reading Mira's the new edited book this weekend, and 2 examples come up. So we have a huge investment in getting 18-year-olds to vote, like the first time that that's an opportunity, because if they come to see themselves as someone who that's what I do, like I vote, like when elections come up, they're extraordinarily likely to continue doing so. And likewise, like with blood donations, like if someone can sort of be convinced to donate blood once, and that becomes a part of like, that's what I do. I'm a person who donates blood. They're way, way more likely to donate blood going forward. And so what I think is happening in ethics class, and I'll wrap up just momentarily, is that I think that ethics class is offering Boston Prep students, it's offering an opportunity for like exposure to new worldviews, and I think that's important. B, I think it's offering an opportunity for schema building. Like I think that kids are actually getting to sort of have time to reflect once a week on, in this particular situation, like how would I act? Like what kind of person am I and how would I act? But I put that picture of kind of the volleyball player setting the volleyball, because I think that what happens in ethics class kind of creates an opportunity for way, way more schema building throughout the rest of the school week. And because what it does is that all of the kids at Boston Prep have a common language for talking about these moral character traits. Like when you say integrity at Boston Prep, that all the kids in that school have a definition in their heads of what that means. Like, and it's different at different levels, but they all have some kind of, they've spent time thinking about that word, and they've spent time thinking about compassion and respect and so on. And that creates this common language, which you hear at all phases of the school day. So for instance, like at a community meeting, a coach stood up and said, the virtue I want to talk about today is integrity. He's the coach of the boys basketball team. Often we talk about integrity being tell the truth. Another way integrity is practice being able to look within yourself and ask the question, am I doing everything that I can? And when you have that integrity, success is going to come. He kind of went on to compliment the basketball team for their performance that evening. At another community meeting, like the kids were getting sort of awards for their enrichment activities, and the yoga teacher stood up and she said, it takes a lot of personal integrity to push yourself in yoga. And 2 students really pushed themselves every day, showed a greater desire to get better and better. And I think we know that precise praise is powerful, but I think it's really powerful for that precise praise to come in language that the community has spent some time really thinking about what it means. A Boston Prep middle school teacher explained to me that like having this common language is really valuable in disciplinary moments. Like he says, like I know I have a specific language to use with them to tell them exactly why and how things went wrong. And I think that's really powerful. And then a 10th grade student said to me, he said, inside of school we joke around and say, oh, you persevere and you show courage, and yeah, we're joking about it, but we actually mean what we're saying behind it. Like, and so you hear the kids actually using this language amongst themselves. And a parent underscored this. She was a parent of a 6th grade student and a 9th grade student in the school. And she says, my oldest daughter thinks that it helps build a person. She's kind of talking about this language of the virtues. If she's hanging out with her friends, she'll say, you're not showing compassion. That is not respect. You know, she's using them in her everyday language, in her everyday life. And I think it's just really interesting to kind of think about this community that has this common language for talking about how one should make one's way through the world. Like, and it's not prescriptive particularly. I mean, you have to sort of use that language to think about that question of how do you make your way through the world. But it's powerful to have the language in place. I think I should probably start to wind things up. So rather than sort of going through the example, I'll just say, in 2010, Massachusetts State Legislature enacted this law saying like all schools have to talk about bullying at all levels. And at least at the high school level, I'm extraordinarily skeptical about the effectiveness of that. I just think sort of saying you have to do this, I just am very skeptical that that's going to have much of an effect. Because I think that high school kids know that bullying is wrong. That's not the issue. And I think I have lots. I could sort of rant about that for a little while. But what I will say is that I think that at Boston Prep, the conversations about bullying were much, much deeper than what I believe to be happening in kind of schools across the state, because they had this language already in place for talking about how are we supposed to treat each other, how are we supposed to make our way through the world. And so they just incorporated into ethics class readings and then sort of case studies about issues of bullying. And I think that they were able to they were able to go much deeper because they were able to talk about bullying within the context of integrity, compassion, respect, and so on. So I'll kind of skip that. And I'll just say that I think that establishing a common vocabulary, so I think that the key impact of ethics class, I think, was this establishment of the common vocabulary that then sort of impacted kids kind of throughout the school day, throughout the school week, throughout the school year, throughout their time at Boston Prep. And what was really interesting as I sort of got deeper into this project, and the reason it kind of expanded into a book, is that it became clear that all three schools had developed common vocabularies for talking about how to act. It was just, they had different vocabularies. Like, you know, they literally had a different set of words that they used to kind of talk about, to reflect together as a community about how are we to treat each other. And the book is really about each of those three schools and kind of the ways in which they use these different vocabularies to foster students' character development. Oh, and the very last thing I'll say is I think that character development is incredibly context specific. Like if you think back to this idea of schemas, that if you think back to that sort of a cognitive structure for how you behave in a very precise situation. Like, so I mean, for instance, I think that probably most of us in this room have a schema for how you vote in presidential elections. And I bet like most of in this room have a schema that we don't vote in like local elections. You know, I mean, I would be shocked if more than 20% of the people in this room like voted in like an off-year local election. And so I think that if it's that context specific, I think that what Boston Prep has done and the schools have done by sort of creating this common vocabulary is extraordinarily important because it allows you to then sort of deploy that vocabulary in very precise moments and kind of help kids think through their behavior in very precise phases of the school day. And so I'll say when I hear, like, I think KIPP has gotten a ton of publicity for their character report card over the course of the year. I don't know enough about KIPP to know much about like how that's going. But when I think about sort of grit, and any other character strain, I guess I think that it actually varies dramatically. Like when I think about myself, I show a lot of grit, like when it comes to writing a paper, and I show almost no grit when it comes to like dealing with a leaky faucet. Like I give up in 5 minutes, and I think that's because I have a schema for how I act when it comes to writing a paper, and I have a schema that I will not be successful, like if it comes to trying to fix this leaky faucet. And so I guess I think that like if like a school like KIPP is using like something like a character report card formatively to kind of like get that vocabulary into the system, then maybe that's something that like could be something. But I think if it's just trying to if it's being used as a summative assessment, kind of say like this is how your grit works. You know, I guess I think that it's much more context specific to that, and I think that these three schools are actually doing a much better job of kind of creating an underlying vocabulary and then deploying it in very precise moments. And I can either stop there or say one more thing. It's up to you.
Why don't you stop there and build the one more thing?
Right. Okay. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
That was great. So first I just want to thank CMEI for inviting Professor Sider to give us a talk this afternoon. And I feel really honored to be able to respond in the beginning. I'm sure it's going to be a very excellent discussion. I apologize in advance. I won't be able to stay for it. I have a class to go to very, very shortly. But before I respond, I just want to thank Scott for the thoughtful and thought-provoking talk. I remember being an undergraduate at the U School of Education now 15 years ago, and it seems really clear to me that today's students are really well served by your intrinsic curiosity and rigorous attention to detail and really uncommon ability to transform what shows a tremendous amount of data into a compelling story, probably many stories. And I should also say that I really think it takes real conviction and an authentic commitment on the part of school leaders and teachers to be forthright about the role that schools play in social, emotional, civic, and character development. And that by doing so, these three schools and many others that have not yet been written about play a vital role in making civic and moral education a part of the broader public discussion. So, Scott has written this book at a time when, as he said, a focus on character education was really kind of re-emerged onto the educational landscape. He mentioned Paul Tufts' recent work, which I think has nicely synthesized decades of research on resilience and how it can be cultivated, but also kind of took that as a departure point to look really closely at how vastly different schools sought to incorporate research by providing explicit instruction and assessment on character traits like integrity, compassion, perseverance, and famously or infamously grit. Scott's research really extends that work by studying schools that seem on the surface to be quite similar in several dimensions. but which have chosen to emphasize distinct types of character strengths and to do so in markedly different ways, suggesting that these emphases have significant differences on students' beliefs and intentions to act. And I think this research has important implications for how we understand the effects of schools' mission statements and values on what gets taught, how it gets taught, and what we can expect as a result. I would like to actually take a few steps back, though, and I'd like to pose a question about motives in the spirit of Berkowitz's definition about motivation. It's a question that I hope will resonate for practitioners as well as for researchers working in partnership with practitioners. And specifically, I'd like to ask if we agree that character education is an important priority for schools, should it matter why people are prioritizing it? To put it another way, if we believe that the means matter, in this case structures and pedagogical tools that promote character development, should we care about the ends used to justify it? And I believe that we should. The familiar phrase, the ends justify the means, is most often used when the ends are deemed desirable, but the means seem unscrupulous. In the case of character education, though, I think that for the most part, the means, arrayed as they are along a spectrum of different emphases and modes of implementation, as Scott's pointed out, are generally commendable. Today, I'd like to question the ends. Much of, I think, contemporary character education, especially as it's evolved at urban public charter schools, like Victory described in Scott's book, has couched itself, as he noted, in a drive for higher academic achievement and college readiness. For example, KIPP, the network of charter schools highlighted by Tuff and alluded to in the talk, talks about the development of character strengths as, quote, necessary for the success of our students in college and in life. And the Achievement First network of urban charter schools says that their mission is to provide young people with, quote, the academic and character skills they need to graduate from top colleges and to succeed in a competitive world. On Boston Prep's website, the school emphasizing moral character strengths, character is discussed in relation to Aristotle's call to make excellence a habit of mind. And the examples used to demonstrate this commitment include the classes in ethical philosophy, but they're juxtaposed with the hands-up method adults use to gain, quote, immediate silence, and the slant, sit-up, listen, ask and answer questions, nod your head, and track the speaker technique that Boston Prep calls, quote, a means of demonstrating respect and a research-based method of increasing learning. Don't get me wrong. College is a very worthy goal. And high schools like Academy of the Pacific Rim and Boston Prep, as Scott noted, have been very successful indeed at having their graduates accepted to college. I think that's a wonderful thing. My concern, I think, is that character education built primarily around, or in the context of college readiness, is liable to confound and confuse these two really worthy goals. That character is important, even moral character strengths are important in so much as they help students succeed in school. Achievement is the end goal, and character strengths, even moral character strengths, such as those emphasized at Boston Prep, serve this goal. Aristotle, cited as above as a model for Boston Prep's character education program, believed that the highest good, living well, should be desirable for its own sake, and that all other activities should be in service of this highest good. College, while desirable, is not the end goal. Rather, college, or whatever activities you choose to pursue after high school, should be in service of the higher good, living well. And I believe that the extent to which schools intentionally or unintentionally blend these goals has an effect on students' short and long-term commitment to moral reasoning and character development. And therefore, we cannot understand the latter without also understanding the former. Now, I do recognize, as Scott noted, that conflated character with academic achievement is surely, in part, a reflection of the fact that schools operate within a policy context that has defined success very narrowly. Success is not measured in students who do the good, of course. It is rather measured in test scores and college acceptance rates. So when studying character education programs, I believe that it is critical to account for the explicit and implicit motives that underlie them. How do school leaders, teachers, and students understand the purposes behind their school's approach to character education What are areas of agreement or disagreement? Do character education programs lead students to develop an enduring habit of mind, or a short-term shift in thinking and behavior? Are some emphases or modes of implementation more effective at nurturing enduring habits than others? How do students make sense of their character education experiences once they leave high school? How does this meaning-making differ depending on the students' college and career trajectories? If character is intentionally or unintentionally linked so closely to college, and a student does not find success in college, to what do they attribute their lack of success? And finally, how might we as researchers and interested stakeholders drive a conversation about the virtues of character education as distinct from achievement and worthy for its own sake in a way that does not risk being seen as somehow opposed to high achievement? I'm aware that, in closing, I'm aware that sustaining this conversation, undertaking the research that will accompany it, which I'm sure many of us will be doing, will require courage and perseverance and integrity, among many other things. And the fortunate thing, I think, is that in nurturing these characteristics in ourselves, we may find that we are also good models for students of what it means to live well. Thank you, and thanks for really the full line.
I mean, I think those are really important questions and important points. And like, why don't I just open up either to questions or responses to ideas that James raised or that raised?
Yeah, I was having a lot of the same thoughts, and I think that we often are equating leadership and success with college entry, or a high GPA in high school. When you look at sort of, especially underperforming communities with Hispanic populations, a lot of times, those aren't the kids who actually have sway with their peers. And I also think about so what are appropriate measures then? And if we're, you brought up the No Child Left Behind, and how that sort of was an interruption to this trend. But then I also think as educators, we've kind of forfeited the ground of measurement to qualitative measures and numerical data, and it's very difficult when you're talking about things like character education. And I wonder what the schools are doing to maybe start to gather evidence of how kids are taking action, or are there performance assessments where they're not just asking kids to write about things, but to actually act in such a way? Because I find working with adolescents, they're all great at saying, oh yeah, if I were in your shoes, I'd do this. But then you watch them 5 minutes later and they're doing something different. So is anybody really looking at performance measures and gathering that qualitative data?
It's a great question. Like, and I mean, the short answer is I don't know. I don't know of such a. I can't think of an example right off the top of my head of such an endeavor. There may well be. I will say that, like, a school like Gloucester Prep is very interested in that question. Like, and I think that they're really distressed, like, by the possibility that sort of like ethics kind of stops at the classroom door. Like if like when something happens, like a bunch of kids get caught shoplifting, let's say at the store down the street after school. I mean, they're very upset about that. Like in terms of like, well, what does that mean? Like, what does that mean in terms of like the the transferability of what we're trying to do here? Like and it was interesting. I'll tell you, the kids, the high school kids, the boys, the high school boys that I interviewed actually talked about the ethics, or what they were learning in ethics class being more useful to them outside of school than in school. Like they sort of said, in school it's kind of like, you have people kind of prodding you to do the right thing. And they sort of said, like, outside of school, like you're in that moment where are you gonna get in the fight or not gonna get in the fight, or do this thing or not do this thing. And so qualitatively, I mean, I think that I feel like I was also interested in these questions from a qualitative standpoint. Like, I don't think it would have been satisfying to me to just say, like, look, it went from 4.5 to 4.7. But I think that this question of performance assessments is really important. And I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I don't think I have a good answer to, but someone else might about sort of where people are thinking about this work in more creative ways, maybe.
On the performance assessment, I don't know about the sort of character education. I know at least in civic education, there's been a lot of talk about badges and simulations and using online measures because you can also do it doesn't have to be asynchronous, so you can have groups of kids doing it simultaneously and then actually seeing how they work together. So it's not as good as the surprise somebody by putting their parent back in front of them and see do they intervene or do they stand by. But it's more authentic than what do you think you would do in this situation.
Around moral education, there are also a number of organizations now that are trying to mobilize young people as community builders or change makers and are tracking who's doing what, essentially. But this is all online, so there's no texture to it. I mean, it doesn't really answer the question you're doing about what exactly is these young people doing and what kind of impact.
It's a great question.
So along similar lines to thinking about how to measure the performance, indicators or stuff. So the No Excuses schools have really strong systems for tracking discipline of students. So one question that I have is, where do those two things, where are they meeting? And how and are the schools looking at whether kids' behavior is changing over time due to interventions that they're thinking about through this class or through other means in their schools?
That's a great question. So I'm going to show you something I feel a little hesitant to, because of course James is kind of like thinking about this in relation to GPA is like the wrong way to think about it. So I feel a little, hesitant, but your question I was interested in this question too. So I just, since I had all the grade point averages for the kids and I had all the demerits data for the kids, I said which of these character strengths are predicting grade point average and change in grade point average and demerits and change in demerits. And so when I kind of created just big regression models where I put all of the character strengths and all of the demographic data into one big regression model for grade point average and one big grade point regression model for demerits, this is kind of, if I scale it down, what I found, which was that grade point average is significantly predicted by school connectedness, which we know, perseverance, which we know. It's negatively predicted by integrity, across the three schools. And there's a bunch of different ways to think about that. So that's concerning, right? That the kids who have the best grades were on average the kids who scored lower on measures of academic integrity. I mean, it could be that if you're willing to cheat, you actually do better. Cheating works. That could be it. And that's very possible. It could be that that academic integrity measure was also somehow measuring how much you care about grade. Your willingness to cheat was on some weird level, a measure of how invested you were. That's a second possibility. And then, I've done some writing about that, and I've tried to think of different reasons, because I'm not sure if what I've captured is what is, but I have to say when I've shared that with a couple of the principals, they haven't been necessarily surprised. So that's kind of interesting, right? That we, but if I flip down to here, none of the character traits predict receipt of demerits except integrity, and that is the way you want it to be. Kids who have high levels of integrity show on average low levels of demerits, and so I don't know. On one level, you could say to yourself, well, all three types of character are doing something, perseverance, school connectedness, integrity, or you could focus in on this integrity issue. And I think in relation to James's point that we can go too far thinking about GPA. I don't think any of the school leaders when I show them this, they're kind of well, we should stop. I don't think that their reaction is, well, we'll stop worrying about integrity. I think that they see that as a problematic relationship that they need to do something about.
I have a question. You focus on integrity and perseverance because those were the only two that were statistically significant.
Right.
And then you told some nice stories about them. But of course, the school emphasized 5 characteristics, and 3 of them weren't statistically significant in the same ways. And integrity, interestingly, was academic integrity, where you told the story about Boston Prep as being about moral character as opposed to, say, academic character or sort of success in life character. But the form of integrity that mattered was academic at Boston Prep. And perseverance actually was a measure. At least one of the 2 measures was about homework, right? So Yeah, I mean, I don't know what you're.
You want to, it was a number of items. But yeah,
Okay, all
but
right,
it's
so,
more, yeah.
so it all seems to be pretty academic, so I guess I spent some time wondering, well, you know, are you telling a story that sounds nice because it works for those two, but then you would expect it to apply to the others, and especially you would expect it to apply to the ones like compassion.
And I did see, and I think I mentioned that at the high school level at Boston Prep, I did see
Yeah.
significant differences in compassion also.
Right, I guess it felt, I wondered though, how much were you sort of significance chasing, and how much should you worry about the fact that the stories that you're telling should apply, you know, that if they don't apply across the board, then that should lead you to wonder if the story applies to the...
It's a good question. Like, so, I mean, so there were 5 kind of core values that Boston Prep focused on: integrity, compassion, perseverance, respect, and finally, integrity, compassion, perseverance, respect, and courage. Excuse me. And I saw statistically significant differences on 2 of them, like on integrity and compassion. On respect, which the way Boston Prep framed it, the way I chose to measure it was I used a youth social responsibility measure. I actually saw all 3 schools showed, that was actually the one measure where all the schools kids showed big increases over the course of the year, and it's just that they were the same, like they all moved up at the same levels. And I think that may be in part because like the civic character that Pacific Rim was doing kind of hit that also. So that's a third. And then so we have left perseverance, which I think the other schools just did better. You know, you kind of see that. And then courage, I think that I think that may have been a measurement thing. Like courage actually felt like the hardest one to kind of hone in on. Though as you noted, like integrity would have been harder, except that I felt like, okay, like I couldn't find a good measure for like more global integrity in like a global sense. I'm like, okay, so I'll focus in on what we do have a good measure for, which is academic integrity. Like and I think that maybe it's a little bit bright. Like I think that maybe my findings are a little brighter, you know, than you were asking about. But no, I mean it definitely is. It's definitely a question to me. Like, well, why did like I see integrity movements at both the middle school and high school level for Boston Prep, but only at the high school level when it comes to compassion? And it may have stuff to do with it may have stuff to do with kind of developmental readiness for like fairly abstract concepts. You know, that also may be a piece of it.
Yeah, I'm interested in the potential tension between the schools providing vocabulary, making it clear what the values of the school are, and then this idea where they're being developmentally sensitive, and it's a restaurant, it's not a restaurant, sorry, it's a kitchen, not a restaurant,
Right.
and kind of allegedly leaving it open for them to be true to themselves. And if you saw tension there, and I was wondering if you came up against kind of some level of moral relativism amongst kids, which is very you see it in other studies that come up, that you leave it open.
That's so interesting. You know, I think I would say that sort of on average, and this probably won't be surprising to people who know no excuses schools. Like, I mean, I think that if anything, like that metaphor of the kitchen was useful for Boston Prep because they were pretty willing to be directive. Like, you know what I mean? Like they're not like, you know, no, like I think that like at the middle school level, like, I mean, they were willing to put forth a worldview for kids to kind of offer, and they pulled back on that as the kids got into the high school grades, and I think that was good. I mean, I think that what I think that no excuses schools are seeing across like the board is that if you sort of try to like be that directive at once your kids get into the high school level, like, you know, it all falls apart. Like you have to give high school kids more flexibility to kind of be thinkers, and so I mean there was, you know, it meant that things were less smooth, right? So for instance, Boston Prep had this honor council that was made up of faculty and teachers, and they came up with this kind of honor pledge that kind of was sort of like, I will sort of act with integrity, and it was sort of West Pointish, like, and turn in people who don't. And like the senior, I mean, it was kids and teachers who came up with this, and the senior class was like, as a group, was like, we're not signing this. And it was a really interesting moment, frankly, for the school, because like on some level, what they wanted to was happening, because the kids were posing philosophical reasons for why they weren't going to sign this pledge, but they weren't going to sign the pledge. Like, and so it was actually, I mean, I think it was a really good learning experience, like for everyone. And you know, and I'll say like for the seniors, like their assignment, their final sort of assignment for the year, which they're still working on getting right, was like seniors had to come up with like a personal code of ethics. Like they had like their sort of thesis for graduating was writing a personal code of ethics, and you know, and they were told like, you know, it doesn't have to be, we don't have to agree with it. Like but it has to be supported by, by kind of philosophical justification.
So thank you so much for this. This is fantastic, and it's great to see a former ed school graduate back here. It's sort of like, oh, there's hope for us.
It's nice to meet you.
So I actually wanted to go back to James's comments, and I wish he was here, but he talked about this sort of difference between the ends and the means. But I kind of wanted to raise the question whether we really should be divorcing the two so much. And I kind of bring this up just in the sense of looking at this task kind of classwork guide and thinking about something like the role of religion. So, I'm curious to sort of get your thoughts on, to what degree does religion play a role, or, both Gandhi and Muhammad Ali are kind of arguing on religious grounds. Does that come up in your study at all? Is that comments from that?
It's a good question. Teachers that I interviewed, so at the middle school level, I should say, I never explained this, like the middle school level is like class teachers teach the ethics curriculum to their advisors, like 6 to 8 students. At the high school level, they have a dedicated ethics teacher. It's like it just gets too, you'd have to know a lot about philosophy to teach at the high school level. And a bunch of the teachers that I interviewed, for instance, so like said that, a lot of kids like have sort of anti-gay biases like on religious grounds. Like they're coming from religious families and have sort of moral concerns with homosexuality. And so for instance, like I didn't happen to see it like in that Harvey Milk lesson. I didn't actually see pushback like in that particular lesson, but a bunch of teachers told me that like that's a place where you do see pushback at various points. Like so I do think that those things kind of come into play. Not, I wouldn't say overwhelmingly, but that was a clear example of where it did.
Comment, maybe two questions, but I don't want to take up too much time. So that's one question, I'll share the other one first time. The comment is, I also agree with James that it's very important to elevate morality for its own sake. But I also think doing law school is really important for moral development. And the way these things get opposed is not helpful sometimes. And kids who fail in school are so much more vulnerable to delinquency and drug abuse and just about every kind of concern we're thinking about. And I did lots of interviews with kids in high school, in long-term communities, who say it's so important to get to college because if I don't get to college, I am vulnerable to drugs and gangs and other things that are very concerning. And so I think it can be a social, emotional, ethical disaster to fail in school. And so both of these things are important for that. That was a comment. Interesting your thoughts about it, that was the comment. The question was, it seems like a lot of what the class does is increase ethical awareness, so it increases your awareness of populations that are different from you, from kids that are different from you, which seems highly valuable to me. I'm a little less clear, you had the Berkowitz book about motivating and enabling, about moral motivation. So you can be able to take the perspective of somebody different from you and have more awareness of philosophy, but what makes you care about that perspective? And what motivates you to care about that perspective? And that seems, that's a moral identity question, I think. And my guess is there are many aspects of the school that are also cultivating that moral identity, that it adheres in all kinds of relationships in the school with other kids and other adults. But anyway, that's interesting.
I think that's a great point. And I think that the opportunity. So at the end of sort of every few weeks, like the assignment at the middle school level was a treatise where the kids had to reflect upon sort of the role of this character strength in their own lives, and I think that's valuable. I think that's sort of valuable. You have the awareness, and then you have the reflection, and then in terms of like the actual sort of action. Another way in which that common vocabulary kind of plays out at Boston Prep, and in all three schools actually have sort of mechanisms for this, but at Boston Prep, they have a weekly community meeting, and anyone in the school can stand up and offer what they call a virtue commendation to anyone else in the school for sort of embodying one of these character traits. So you'll hear like a kid stand up and say I'd like to give a virtue commendation to Mr. Sider because he showed a lot of compassion staying after school with me to help me understand fractions. And so maybe that gets at like sort of this question of like, well, how do you actually sort of like see this living, like reinforcing the way it's actually lived? And
that said better what I was saying. And I just find so many schools there's a rhetoric reality.
Mm.
You know, there is
Oh, absolutely.
the right posters on the walls, the right things said in the curriculum, and then adults are not, are inconsistent.
That's right. And interestingly, I mean, to be fair, because I mean, everything in life is pluses and minuses, right? Like, I mean, you see that in the study that they went up in integrity, but so a bunch of the teachers said to me, these words come up so much, like at these three, the different kind of languages come up so much at the three schools that teachers say that sometimes we feel like kids are using them instead of thinking. It'll be like, what's this about? And like at Pacific Rim, for instance, where Gambate, which means perseverance in Japanese, like is sort of one of their kind of key vocab. Like kids, it's about Gambate, and the teacher will be like, why? And so it's interesting. A bunch of the sort of the high school teachers at a couple of the schools said, I actually try not to use the common language in my interactions with kids sometimes because they've been so saturated with it that I actually feel like it's preventing them sometimes from thinking critically about these. And so everything has, everything in life has pluses and minuses.
Just curious to what extent these schools encourage the parents to use the language at home, to what extent they have conversations and dialogue with parents and other community members about how to maintain, especially fostering practices on moral
Right.
behavior.
It's a great question.
So you had that quote from a parent that I thought was really interesting, but I wondered how prevalent that awareness was.
It's a good question, and I feel like on some level I'm not sure I know. I mean, I interviewed about 7 or 8 parents from each of the 3 schools, and I'm not, I feel like not totally convinced that I got the parents who were willing to be interviewed, so that's, one thing. Though, I mean, I guess I would say that what was interesting to me, this is sort of a half-answered question, is that I sort of thought that maybe like a bunch of parents would have like sort of entered the lottery for that school because of the character education programming, and that was not true at all. Like, it was all because this was a safe school, and I hear that kids go to college and go to this school. Like, there was nothing, there was no selection effect in relation to character education, like amongst parents' interest. I don't think the schools did a ton at the adult level to kind of reach out to parents about these words. Like, so for instance, at this iPod point test this today, one of the schools in Chicago was talking about how they have like sort of parent nights to help parents like sort of learn how to use the iPad themselves. And there wasn't anything like that going on. But especially at the middle school level where kids are still talking to their parents, the kids were bringing the language home, like for sure. And so the parents were getting it from the kids. And so the parents definitely knew these words, but really through their children, kind of. And it was interesting. Pacific Rim was pretty cute. It was cute. Like there was a mother who was like struggling to sort of pass a professional test, like that she needed to, for her career. And her kid was, she's like, yeah, my kid will say to me, like, you really just need to show Gambate, like you need to, the kids were sort of using the language with their parents at the middle school level. My sense is high school parents, kids don't talk to their parents, so less so at that point. Mm-hmm.
Getting back to James's comments, and I know that this research was structured in a certain way, but is there, or are there any future plans to look at what other things does the integrity correlate with? Like, I'm just curious about this question of living well,
Mm-hmm.
and also you mentioned the character development is within context, and so
Right.
like how are you taking these lessons into their community, and or are you more committed to service? Do you have more opportunities? Are you seeking out again the connection between our beliefs, our identity, our behavior, our actions? And I don't know if that's.
It's a great question. I think the short answer is, so I think that one really promising reason to do research in charter schools, and really many sort of contemporary urban schools, is that, all 3 of these schools, they are not going to lose track of their alumni. They are going to obsessively kind of be checking in with them over the next 10, 15, 20 years. And so I guess I think that there really is the opportunity to say, okay, let's, as they sort of reach out to their alumni, let's find out about sort of the associations that they have, the activities that they're engaged in, the work that they're pursuing. So I think that the opportunity is there to do that kind of work.
Well, and a related question is, are there opportunities for them to really talk about current events and issues around power and injustice, and how they see themselves as actors and community leaders and catalysts for change, right? So you can certainly learn how to behave congruently in
Yes.
your own life, but then like how do you engage with other people around creating a more just society, a more fair and equal society? Like, is that also part of the goal in addition to maybe individual academic success, but larger community progress?
Yeah, and it's interesting that Mira knows that she's read mine. I mean, that's actually what I want to study next. Because it's interesting, so like Roxbury Park, which is one of the schools I didn't talk about as much. So one of their advisory units, it was called "What It Means to Be Part of a Movement," and they were sort of framing doing this work now and being successful now as being part of sort of a movement for civil rights. And it gets a little, that actually clashes a little bit in some ways with the way a lot of scholars have thought about kind of raising awareness of sort of social justice issues. Like it's a much more kind of individualized kind of like framing of it in some ways. But I'm really interested to see how does it have the same effects as kind of a more traditional kind of critical consciousness raising school. So I think that's actually where we should go.
That's probably where we should stop.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it.